How's it going, everyone? Taki here. Today we're going to do a review of the new RK2023. This is a new handheld that PowKiddy just released, and I'm interested to take a look at what it can do. So let's take a look at what's inside the box. Inside the package, we have the device itself, a USB cable, and a manual. For those of you that are new to this market, you might not know that there's an older handheld from this line called the RK2020. I actually filmed an entire video on that device, but I never ended up posting it because the handheld was pretty bad. It's kind of giving me a bit of PTSD looking at this because there were a lot of bad handhelds that were releasing around the time of this device, but this one was the worst. The main selling point for this after its initial release is that it was dirt cheap, and at its lowest price, it was actually pretty decent for the hardware that you got here. Build quality was pretty much garbage, as was everything else on this. My hope is that the new product is much better than this one. So yeah, this thing is kind of a bit different than some of the other products that this company has released, and it is a lot different than the RK2020 on first glance. So as you can see, we have a shape that it seems pretty much inspired by the PSP Go. As you guys know, I did a big video recently on the PSP in 2023, so I was really excited to get my hands on this device to see if it could hold up to some of that nostalgia I feel for the PSP. The biggest difference being that we don't have a sliding screen, but a lot of the same things carry over to this. So on the front of the device, we have our start and select buttons on the top corners, a D-pad with rounded tips, set of ABXY buttons that seem pretty big, and two analog sticks that are recessed that have L3 and R3 functionality. Dead center, we do have that RK2023 branding, which is a bit unfortunate to see since the RK2020 was not a great handheld at all. I know a lot of people don't like the PowKiddy branding when they put that in the front, but I probably would have gone with that or a completely blank space here. Continuing on to the top of the device, we have a set of inline shoulder buttons with R2 and L2. We also have a set of volume buttons that are recessed a bit, and we have a power button and a reset button. Dead center, we have an HDMI port. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. On the bottom of the device, we seem to have another upgrade over the original RK2020. We have a second speaker hole, and hopefully this one is not fake. Moving on from there, we have two USB ports, with one of them being used to charge the device, and the other one being used to plug in other peripherals to this handheld. Further towards the center from there, we have two SD cards, with one of them being for the OS, and the other one being for ROMs. And dead center, we have a headphone jack. And in case you're wondering, my device came with a 16 gigabyte card for the OS and a 64 gigabyte card for the ROMs. Moving on over to the back, we don't have a lot to talk about here. There is a textured print on the left and the right side, but this does not do anything to add grip to this device. And just to finish up on the design, on the left and the right sides, we have absolutely nothing. First impressions of having this device in my hand is it feels kind of similar to having a PSP in your hand. If you've ever used a PSP or a PSP Go, then the ergonomics are pretty much the same. As you can see when I put my PSP on top of this device, the arc of this edge is pretty close to being what it is on a PSP. My first impressions of this are that the ergonomics are pretty decent. I can get to all of these face buttons pretty easily, and the shape here is pretty comfortable. All right, right off the bat, I'm gonna have to lower down the volume. This is pretty loud by default. If you didn't catch that boot screen, we are using a build of Just Enough Linux. This is going to be similar to a lot of the systems out there, but this has a lot of great customization under the hood. Let's head into the main menu to check out the system information. In here, we can see that this device is powered by an RK3566. This is a 4-core 855 processor that we've seen in a few other handhelds. What we're not able to see is how much RAM this device has, so I'm going to fill out the rest of this screen with some of the other specs of this device. The biggest thing is that this device does not have any Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and we'll talk more about that in a later part of this video. What I want to do now is check if this does have two speakers. So we're going to go over to Super Nintendo. I am going to load up one of my favorite games. So I'm noticing something interesting about this. Usually on handhelds like these, they'll have the speaker all the way up on the grill, but this one seems to be buried a bit, and I wonder if they did that to get a sound chamber effect going on. But I am happy to report that we do have stereo speakers, and the sound quality is actually a lot better than I was expecting. Here's a sound recording of the speakers. I have heard better devices than this, but that's actually pretty good with a decent level of bass for a device that's this small. Now, the main reason why I think anybody would really be interested in this is the fact that it has a 4:3 screen, and this is going to be perfect for the games that run the best on this processor. This is going to be older TV-based systems, and a lot of them are going to run flawlessly on this processor. I want to start testing out the buttons because I'm not that sure that this D-pad is going to work out that well, but before we do that, I need to make some customizations to this system because it's not set up the way that I want it to be. As you can hear, this device is playing menu music, and that's kind of annoying to me. So the first thing that we're going to do is head over to the sound settings, and in there, I'm going to turn off the front end music. The next thing that I want to change is this UI. This one is actually pretty decent for a default one, but I think they might have something better pre-installed. Let's head over back into the menu again and go down to UI settings. And in there, we can see that this is set to the system theme. Let's get into there, and we can see that we have 4 options total. But the one that I really want to go with is this minimal theme. I like being able to see the left and the right system at all times, so this one is the one that I'm going to go with. Alright, so now that we've done that, let's start taking a look at the buttons themselves. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we have a set of pretty chunky ABXY buttons. These guys come in about 8.3 millimeters, which is just a bit bigger than the buttons that are used in almost all of the handhelds from Anbernic. There's a couple things I like to pay attention to whenever I'm considering a handheld like this. I like buttons that aren't too small, and I want to make sure that they have a decent amount of travel to them if they're conductive rubber buttons. The other thing that I tend to pay attention to is whether or not the buttons are able to go under the shell when pressed, and that does not seem to be possible on these guys. There is still a decent amount of travel left when these are at their resting position, and that is a good thing. The rubber membrane that's used on this is actually pretty decent. It's not spongy at all, and it springs back up pretty quickly. When it comes to the D-pad, I'm not really sure that this is going to work out that well, so we will have to do a test on it. This thing has rounded edges, and I kind of wish from a design standpoint that they would have gone with the traditional ones that we usually see in these handhelds. This thing is also using conductive rubber, and it seems to pivot well at first glance. I'm not seeing any rough action as I go around, and it seems to be able to press all of the directions evenly. The main thing that I'm looking for here is whether or not I can pivot when I press down in the center, and it doesn't seem to have any issues with that, so we are starting off on a great foot even though the design is a bit wonky. There are 2 games I'd like to use to test out if a handheld has good enough buttons for retro games, and the first one that I like to use is Donkey Kong Country. You can use any platformer game for this, but this one has a lot of jumping and rolling, so this is a great way to test out the face buttons. And from a quick run through on this first level, I'm really liking those big ABXY buttons. The D-pad is also pretty decent, but this isn't a great game to really test out a D-pad. For that, we need to jump into another title. So we're going to quit out of this game by pressing start and select 2 times, and that's going to bring us back over to the main menu. And from here, I'm going to go over to CPS 3, and then we're going to go over to Street Fighter 3. This is a great title to test out the D-pad. And the main thing that I'm looking for here is how easy it is to get off combos that require a lot of D-pad movement. You can use any character for this, but this is the one that I usually use. So this guy has 4 combos that I'm going to try and do. The first one, I'm not having any issues with. So I'm noticing that I can do the combos, but it's a lot more difficult than it probably should be. I don't know if it's because I don't have any experience with this kind of D-pad or if this D-pad is just bad. All right, so one thing that I want to point out after doing that testing, I am noticing that this D-pad has a pretty sharp edge to it. Every time I'm rolling the D-pad, this thing is grinding into my thumb. And after testing this for about 5 minutes or so, it's really starting to get annoying. Here's the RG351P. It's something that's like really subtle, but this thing has slightly more contour to the edge. So when you're rolling your thumb on it, it doesn't hurt. This thing does have a rounded edge to it, but it's not rounded as much as it probably should have for this purpose. If you're not planning on playing fighting games on this, that might not be a problem for you, but it is something that I wanted to point out. The D-pad doesn't seem to have any other issues except for that one. Now, this thing that I want to focus on is the screen itself, and that is one of the good aspects of this device. They have a very nice 4:3 panel in here, and what you have to know is not all screens of this size are made the same. There are bad ones and there are good ones. This one is very close to being the best that I've ever seen in this size. I wanted to do a comparison against another device that I've spent a lot of time with that I also enjoy, and that is this device from Anbernic. These devices both have the same processors and they also have the same size screen, but the screen in the PowKiddy device seems to be a lot better than the one that's in this device. I had to turn down the ISO on my camera so that way I could capture this without blowing out the footage. This thing is incredibly bright at its maximum brightness level. Both of these devices are right now at 100% brightness, and I think you can clearly see which one is the brighter of the two. This screen has a cool color temperature to it, whereas the one in the 353 is more of a warm tone. This one is closer to my ideal of around 7,000 Kelvin, but the one in the 353P is not bad. I haven't run any panel measurements on this because this thing only supports Linux and I would need Android for that, but I would say that this thing is definitely above 400 nits if I had to guess. I want this to be an even match between the two of them, so I'm going to lower the brightness on the RK2023 until it matches the maximum brightness on the 353. Okay, so I've gone ahead and tried my best to match the brightness levels. This is 40% on the RK2023 and 100% on the 353. You know, just based on personal preference, I would say that this screen is much better than the one that's in the 353. I've used this handheld a lot and I really wish that it had that screen because this thing is really good. The color temperature is better and the brightness is really good. I had to crank the ISO pretty high, but this is what the devices look like at their minimum settings. It's probably not going to be that obvious on camera, but the 353 goes a bit lower than this one does, but they're both very close. So I turned down the studio light so we can get a look at the viewing angles on this device. We're going to go over to the left, the right. These hard diagonals are usually bad on some of these 3.5-inch screens, but this one seems to be really good. I'm surprised. This is definitely the best screen this company has ever used. I also wanted to test if there's any light bleeding on this since this is a white shell and it's a problem that I've seen before. Right now I have the ISO in my camera set to max and the screen brightness in the handheld is also set to max. I'm not seeing any issues on the screen itself when we're looking dead on, but I do see a tiny amount of light leaking out of the bottom of this screen. It's really minor, but I did want to point it out. One of the good features about this device is that it does support HDMI, but I'm not sure how it's going to work. Some of the other handhelds like this will reboot into a 16:9 screen, and that is a great option if you want to use this as a console. Just be aware that this does not support a full-size HDMI cable, so you will need to purchase that separately as it's not included in the box. I already have one from another handheld. My setup is a little jank, but I am happy to report that this does output in 16:9 when you connect it to an HDMI screen. There is a caveat to this. You have to reboot the device with an HDMI cable connected to get it to output anything at all. It does not support hot plug like other devices do. I can test it, but I don't think that if I unplug this cable right now, the screen will be able to work. I'd have to reboot the entire device. Let's check. And as you can see, nothing is happening on the device itself. This processor can't play that many games that need a bigger aspect ratio than 4:3, but it is still nice that we have this support baked into the handheld. It definitely gives you a lot of extra functionality out of your device. While we're here, I think it's a good time to talk about the ROMs that come with this device. I actually don't like it at all, but what you need to be aware of is this thing is going to come packed with IGN 10 out of 10 games. Like, even if you don't have your own games, you're going to be right at home here with this great selection of titles that they have to offer. Now, I never really knew how bad this game was until I actually tried to play it for this video. This thing is so trash. This isn't the first time that I've looked at this processor, but it has been a while since I did a video on a device that used it. I usually use Android on the 3566 because I can get a lot better performance for some systems, but this stock software is a lot easier to use and it's pretty close to peak performance. While this isn't the best handheld for it, this device handles older retro handheld systems up to GBA without issue. This device shines the most when you're emulating TV-based consoles, and you've got enough power in this package to tackle NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Sega 32X, and PS1. When we go up to Dreamcast, that's where we really start to reach systems that are not fully supported on this processor without some compromises. In this software, the games are running very well at 480p, but we are using auto frame skip. When you try to play bigger Dreamcast games, you will see the auto frame skip putting in a lot more work. Nintendo 64 is another system that is not 100% supported on this processor, but a lot of games are. Most of the popular games that you're going to want to play are going to run just fine on this, but there are some instances where the best performance for a title also means some slight graphical issues. I think the only strange thing that I experienced while testing this hardware were the strange lag spikes in some N64 games. I haven't seen this on other 3566 Linux systems, so this should be something that can be fixed. That leaves us with PSP, and while this processor can play a ton of PSP games, this is a system that you are far better off playing over an HDMI connection. That's the main benefit that this handheld has compared to more powerful handhelds like the RP2 Plus. You'll be able to play a lot of PSP games at 3x native resolution, but there are still a lot of titles that are out of reach even at 1x native resolution. For games like those, you always have the option of using auto frame skip. Before we go over my pros and cons of this device, I want to do a teardown because there's one other thing that we haven't talked about yet. The first thing is that we don't have a vibration motor in this device, but we do have a location where one probably would have gone. This circle over here is about the same size as the round vibration motors that are used in all of these devices, and I'm wondering if they cut it for cost reasons. The second thing that I want to point out is this device does not have a Wi-Fi or a Bluetooth chip, but it does have the place where one would have gone. This was confirmed that it was cut due to cost, but it limits a lot of the functionality that this chip would get with Wi-Fi. The system uses Wi-Fi to be able to scrape the games and assets, and some of the tools inside the OS need Wi-Fi to be able to function. I also want to talk about the thing that I always mention, which is the fact that the battery is acting as a heatsink for this processor. The 3566 can get pretty hot when you're playing demanding games, and all of that heat is being dumped into the battery. Now, when I was testing this out and filming this review, it didn't get that hot, but I wasn't playing those really demanding games. If you're sticking to things that run in 4x3 or some retro games that are under N64, then you're probably not going to need to worry about that at all. Maybe you don't even need to worry about it even if you are playing demanding games, but I still want to mention it anyways. As for my thoughts of them having a sound chamber, that doesn't seem to be the case. They really just slapped 2 mobile speakers in here, and I'm not really sure why they're pushed back that far. They probably could have arranged this a bit better so that way the processor wasn't using the battery as a heatsink, but I digress. It's not that bad. Let's wrap up this video with my pros and cons of the RK2023. On the pro side, we have a couple of things that are really good about this device. The first is that it has a really good screen. This is one of the better 3.5-inch screens that I've seen in other handhelds, and I think the company did a really good job of sourcing this one. The second pro is that this device has good speakers. The original device that this was based off of only had one speaker and it was really crap, but these ones are much better. The third pro is the fact that this device has a really good stock OS. A lot of annoying things are already done for you, and stuff just works out of the box the way it should. When it comes to cons, we have a few things that are not that great about this device. I think the first one is the fact that this doesn't have any Wi-Fi or Bluetooth for the asking price. I could buy a Wi-Fi chip and solder it to the board in that empty space, or I could change around the kernel to be able to support Wi-Fi adapters, but that is not something that the average user is going to be able to do. That ties in to the price of the device. This thing is on sale for $90. Quick little edit break. While I was filming this video, the price of this actually changed dramatically, so a lot of what I was going to say in this next part isn't really valid. This thing was on sale for $90 with a retail price of around $120, and at that point, it wasn't really worth it. But now the sale price is down to $65 with coupons, and that is actually really good for this hardware. A lot of the wonky stuff that this thing has and some of the other cons that I'm about to say are not really that big of a deal when the price is at $65. Back to the video. The next con for me is the design. I'm not really that big of a fan of this. I think they could have done a better job. I will give it to them that this device doesn't look like it was made by AI like some of their other ones do, but there are some weird decisions that they made, like the RK2023 branding on the front with the lines and some of the color options that they went with. And my final con is on the build quality. While the build quality is a lot better than the original RK2020, it still has some areas that could be improved, like the shoulder buttons. Basically what's going on here is there's a lot of noise coming from these shoulder buttons when you move the device around or you just use it. Since there's a decent gap between the front and the back shell around these buttons, they rattle around a lot, and it does make a lot of noise. I'm going to shake this around just so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about, and I'm going to hold the face buttons so that way they are not interfering with this. Now, I wanted to be fair when I made this judgment, so I went through and got a couple of other handhelds. This one is the RG351P, and it also has the same style buttons, but if we shake this around, it basically doesn't make any noise at all. And if we were to shake around the RG353P, which has the same processor as this, it also doesn't make any noise. The only other device that I have that's kind of like this is the RG503. And that one does rattle around, but this is also one of the worst devices that Anbernic has ever made in terms of build quality. So that is not something to be proud about. I think this is an unfortunate thing because the original RK2020 also had this problem, but it was much worse. I'm going to shake this one around so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. I think the unfortunate thing is this is something that's super easy to fix during the R&D phase, and I'm kind of surprised that they didn't just make these buttons a bit thicker because that would have cut down on this noise almost entirely. But that leaves us with my recommendations on this device and who I think this is for. This is a big upgrade over some of the other stuff that they've been designing lately, but it's not something that's really calling out to me. It does have some elements of the PSP Go in there, but not as much as I want. Now, it's also worth mentioning that even though I think this is a little goofy looking, this thing is way worse. And you'd be surprised to find out that it was one of the best-selling handhelds of last year, so maybe that doesn't matter at the end of the day. But yeah, I think this could be a good device for you if you don't already have something with the RK3566 in this form factor or at all, but it's probably a better device for kids. I let my son play with this for a little while and he was having a blast. I think that's probably a better target audience than someone like me. But I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Leave your thoughts down below, and if you have any questions about this device, you can leave those down below as well, and I'll try my best to get back to you. If you like this review, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.